Olene, the heartbeat of humanity is calling you, and the heartbeat of the earth as well. Can you tell the difference? Would I had phrases that are not known, utterances that are strange, in new language that hath not been used, free from repetition, not an utterance which has grown stale, which men of old have spoken. That's a quotation from an ancient source. I'll tell you what the source is at the end of this little talk. I'm here simply to relate a recent event in my life, which was quite unusual. It's possible, I don't know, that this incident might be a sign of good things to come. I'll let you draw your own inferences. It concerns my almost total, really total lack of communication or interchange or interface with anyone in the field of Gnostic scholarship, the history of religions, and the study of the ancient ways of life, the pagan mindset, and the mysteries. It so happens that through the course of my life, beginning at quite an early age, certain events led me in the direction of that field of studies. But I am not a legitimate or certified scholar. I did not complete a collegiate education. I have no letters after my name, and I remain an outsider and a renegade in that particular field, but that is my field. And it could be said to be my field of expertise, such as it is. Now, this incident concerns an article, a paper published in a journal of scholarship in 2019, and not just any journal of scholarship. Let me give you a little background on the significance of this paper. I have it here in my hand, a hardback of a book from a large collection entitled The Nag Hammadi Studies. And I think there are some 40 or more books in this collection, and they include all of the 52 documents in the Nag Hammadi codices discovered in Egypt in 1945. And they've been published in various formats, but this is, as it were, the standard official version. It's a hardcover book. All of these volumes are published in a lovely olive green cover with gold embossed titles. And they're really lovely objects to hold, and they are also extremely expensive. So I only have a couple of these. They run generally from 75 euros up to 300 or 400 euros a piece. Now, this book and all the others in this series come from the same publisher, E.J. Brill. And I see on the title page, this was published in 1996, and it shows the imprint of E.J. Brill, and it says Leiden, New York, and Köln, which is in Germany. So Leiden is a place in the Netherlands, close to where I often lived when I lived in Belgium over many years. Now, I know Belgium pretty much by heart, and I know the Netherlands pretty well, and I've been to Leiden. Actually, sometime in the late 90s, a filmmaker contacted me, a Dutch filmmaker, wanted to make a documentary about the mysteries, so he invited me to come to Leiden, where there is a museum of antiquities where they have reconstructed a Roman temple. And he thought that that was a good setting for me to talk about the mysteries. So he filmed me walking around this Roman temple, and somewhere out there in the world, those clips, those videos probably still survive, although I've never seen them myself. So this publisher in Leiden is the foundation for the release of all serious studies in Coptic of the Nag Hammadi writings and other related literature as well. And it's a top-level publisher. You're looking at this single top-level publisher of that field of studies in the entire world. So any religious scholar who gets published by them has a premier status. I can't say how many scholars are alive today and active in this field. I couldn't even guess, but I'm sure it's a small and tight community. And all of them have that same status. They all share the same prestige of being published by that platform, E.J. Brill. But Brill does not only publish these books, it also publishes journals. And one of them is called Gnosis, the Journal of Gnostic Studies. This is a periodical, a quarterly, something like that, where qualified scholars publish papers, dissertations, and translations in that field of studies, which of course is my field of studies as well. To paraphrase a line and change a line from George Carlin, well, it's a small club and I ain't in it. But in a way, I am now in it, to my surprise. I'm thankful to a longtime student friend who signaled me to this article, this paper, which was published, as I say, in 2019. And the title of the paper, hang on, is The Afterlives of the Archons, Gnostic Literalism and Embodied Paranoia in 21st Century Conspiracy Theory. And it was written by Matthew Dillon, Dillon, who is a historian of religion and a professor at DePauw University in the United States. As you may gather from the title, and good luck on that, this paper concerns the interpretation of Gnosticism today, how it may be taken literally, whatever that means, and how it may belong to or have been absorbed into the genre of certain conspiracy theories which are rampant on the planet, as you know, in this time of great challenge. In the paper, the author considers the work of three people, myself, David Icke, and a woman, Carol L. Reimer, R-E-I-M-E-R, whom I've never heard of. Now, these three individuals are contemporary, living today, and none of them is a qualified Gnostic scholar on the same level as the man who wrote this paper. Nevertheless, there I am in his paper, in the Journal of Gnosis. Thus, someone in that club has recognized my work and considers it worthy of serious scholarly critique and investigation. Now, I must say, just as a side note, that over the last 15 years since Not in His Image came out, I have only received, as I recall, one email coming from someone in academia. I believe it was a professor from a university in Scotland somewhere, wrote me this very brief, but I should say, positive, kind of bracing message, saying in a couple of short paragraphs that my work was outstanding and that what I had accomplished was certainly at the level of university studies and advanced research, and that it deserved to be recognized as such, and he acknowledged that it was outstanding, and he really admired my work. I've never ever received any other acknowledgement of that kind from anyone through the years, but here is a kind of acknowledgement, someone taking it seriously enough to include me in this paper. I must say that I enjoyed reading this paper. On the whole, the manner in which he treats my work is fair, accurate, and respectful. It's not a long paper, and it's fairly easy to read, considering how some of these papers can be written. I think he dedicates maybe 4 or 5 pages of it to me, and if you'd like to read it, I'll put a link in the description. I'm not going to go through the paper and take the time to do that point by point. I'll just cover 2 or 3 points, one of which concerns a slight inaccuracy. So he says of me in the introductory paragraph, Lash identifies himself as, quote, true successor of Mircea Eliade and the rightful heir of Joseph Campbell, end quote. Those were the 2 great comparative mythologists. Well, actually, Campbell was a comparative mythologist. Eliade was a historian of religions who had a deep interest in mysticism and the mysteries and yoga and Sanskrit literature. As did Joseph Campbell, by the way. I believe that he could read Sanskrit. That citation is not exactly accurate. It wasn't me, myself, and I who compared me to Eliade and Joseph Campbell. The man who said that I was the true successor of Mircea Eliade was an old friend and colleague of mine from Dallas, Texas, from the Dallas Institute of Arts and Humanities. His name was Robert Sardello. And when I spoke on a seminar there in Dallas many years ago, the end of the 90s, he introduced me, much to my surprise, by saying that. The comparison to Joseph Campbell comes from my association with the Marian Institute in Marion, Massachusetts. And the members of the Institute, those who engaged me to create metahistory.org, were prone to view me as the successor of Joseph Campbell. So those aspects of my so-called reputation are not self-designations. They were attributed to me by others. As I say, the article is easy reading and handles me fairly and accurately. For instance, he says, Lash goes much further than the classical Gnostic account. Sophia literally, in italics, becomes the earth, Gaia. Earth has no relationship to the inorganic matter of the kenoma. Gaia Sophia emanates a divine radiance due to her origins in the pleroma. This palpable, material, but invisible organic light imbues all substances on earth. Lash equates the organic light with the, quote, imaginal, end quote, as described by Islamicist Henri Corbin, which humans contact through their nous. Well, that is a good paraphrase, but again, it's not quite accurate. As a matter of fact, I cite the ancient sources in the workings of Irenaeus, the writings of Irenaeus and elsewhere, which say that Sophia, the Aeonic divinity from the galactic core, does turn into the earth. That is not my invention. I take that from ancient sources. Apparently, the author has taken some keen interest in my descriptions of the organic light. I was surprised to see in the bibliography that he has actually read the 5 sections of Severed Rose. This is a work in progress, which was originally published on metahistory.org and is now being reworked and replatformed on Nemata. And it is a kind of autobiography or memoir of my life as a mystic. And in the 5 sections of Severed Rose, I describe in vivid detail my encounters with the organic light in a way that has never, ever been done. The initiates in the mysteries, the Gnostic masters, founded their entire program on the experience of encountering the organic light. But they observed a vow of silence about it. They didn't talk about it openly due to a couple of reasons. The best reason being that if you talked about it and described it before someone had the opportunity to experience it, you might queer their experience because they would come to it with a description that might impede their direct and naked realization of what they were seeing. I find it really interesting that he took the time to read Severed Rose, where you find descriptions of the organic light that have never been disclosed publicly, ever, how it behaves, how it looks, how it feels, how it moves, how it responds to the human witness, how to get it to respond. And yet, in this paragraph, he says, this palpable, correct, material, correct, but invisible, not correct. Organic light. It is not invisible. And how could I make it more clear that it is not invisible? Even in Not in His Image, I describe that it is visible. It is not a clear light that you see through. It is a palpable, white, substantial light that you see into. It is not radiant and flashing in the way that one might suppose such a light to be, such a divine source of illumination, a living luminosity. No, it is soft and subtle. And one of the main factors that compelled the ancient Gnostics to observe their vow of silence, not secrecy, was so that when they brought neophytes to the light, they could be more disposed, better disposed to the subtlety of that perception. So if they have no preconceptions of what they're going to see, do you get that? Then they have a better chance of seeing it. So, why he says it's invisible, I don't know. He should know better than that. In another paragraph, and I'll only read maybe one more, he again is quite accurate. Lash says the archons infected Western culture with an ideological virus that he calls the Redeemer complex. The doctrines of a masculine creator God, a chosen people, a savior Messiah, and an impending apocalyptic judgment. The Zadokites extolled a form of social organization that was patriarchal, gynophobic, and oppressive. In the process, indigenous, matriarchal, and ego-consciousness pagans were wiped out in what Lash calls the Gnostic genocide. Well, I don't know if I've ever used that term. I've talked about the archonic infection. Also, I don't know what he means by ego-consciousness pagans. He's obviously not a pagan himself, and from what I can gather from the drift of this essay, that he sees prospects for Gnosticism to be revived in some kind of Christian framework as a new and reborn or made over religious program, which of course I find completely unacceptable. So it's a good article all in all. I am grateful to him for one point that he makes explicitly clear in discussing David Icke. He says, Ike does not seem to have known about the Nag Hammadi codices or ancient Gnostics until 2012, when the term first begins to appear in his work. It seems likely Ike's primary exposure to the Nag Hammadi codices is Lash's writings. Most of Ike's references to the Nag Hammadi codices and much of his theorizing about them show a debt to John Lamb Lash. That is correct. Unfortunately, however, if you can call it unfortunate, David Icke himself does not acknowledge this debt. In one of his talks at Wembley, which went on for 7 hours, he devoted at least half an hour specifically to the Nag Hammadi codices. And he says over and over again, the Gnostics said this and the Gnostics said that, which is not true. The truth is, John Lash says that the Gnostics said this and the Gnostics said that. So he cited me verbatim without acknowledging that he was doing so and without so much as mentioning Not in His Image. And I know that David Icke has read Not in His Image because someone visited him on the Isle of Wight, a student friend, and he had the book on his table. And he even indicated that it was a really important book in that situation. But publicly, he does not acknowledge me. As far as I know, he has never acknowledged me. In the course of the article, he comes around to the question of what is Gnosis today. Gnosticism is an ancient movement. It's dead and gone. And he considers what the three authors propose for the practice of Gnosis today. He says that the practices that Lash proposes are entheogens and sex. Quote, in terms of sexuality, Lash sees references to the snake in the Garden of Eden as a Gnostic reference to the Kundalini. In order to defend ourselves against archontic intrusion, Gnostics would raise the Kundalini in sex rituals. References to the bridal chamber, or Nymphion, are for Lash a code term for the cell of light or protective aura generated by ritual intercourse. Within the cell, the initiates overcome the influence of the archons who produce error in our minds and threaten to take over our bodies. End quote. Well, that is correct. And that also I draw entirely from ancient sources in the Nag Hammadi writings, in particular the so-called Gospel of Philip, which has a long passage on those practices, and other church fathers and ideologues who hated the Gnostics also referred extensively to their sexual practices and the worship of the snake. For instance, in the cult of the Ophites, Ophites were a particular branch of Gnostics who practiced Kundalini, not necessarily Kundalini yoga in the sense it's known today, but they knew what Kundalini was and they worked with it according to their own methods. To my great surprise, he goes on, I won't read the paragraphs, to talk about the Calico War Party and to talk about weapons and tactics and tools for guerrilla warfare against the archons and their proxies, including mention of the killing spell. And he cites the calicowarparty.org, the Thunderbird Formation. And that's pretty wild to find something like that in the writings of a scholar of his particular stature. So that's the paper, that's what it's all about. And what do I make of all that? Well, obviously, I'm pleased. I'm pleased because I do care about what my reputation means to others. I don't care about what it means to myself. When I was living on the island of Hydra, which is in, I believe, the Saronic Gulf outside of Athens, I wrote a paper called Socrates in the Last Days, which was dedicated to my friend Francis Huxley, who was the nephew of Aldous Huxley, good and close friend of mine. whom I met in Santa Fe. And in that article, I quote the Chinese sage Chuang Tzu, who said, "The man of Tao has no reputation." But I also commented on that quote, and I said, in accordance with my way of thinking, it would be more correct to say, the man of Tao acts as if he has no reputation. After all, a reputation is something that is formed around you by others. It's not something that you form or control yourself. So obviously, I don't have a reputation as a high-level top Gnostic scholar like the individual who wrote this article. But there I am in the article nonetheless. I find it quite remarkable. So in conclusion, let me see if I can say just a few more words about what I think about my reputation, purely for your amusement, of course. I said on some talk that I recorded, who knows when, that in my work, in the material that I've written and spoken, you find more originality than in all the spiritual teachers of the 20th century combined. Now, there's an arrogant claim, and there's a statement that obviously reveals my delusions of grandeur and my sense of grandiosity, clear as day. But what if it's true? So, if it is true, then I would say, great. Anyone who recognizes that knows the basis of my reputation. That is to say, what I would like my reputation to be, insofar as I care about it, which I don't. But for others, it matters. I recognize that. And it gets better. For those who come to my material and what I teach, and who can recognize that originality, it gets even better. Because I'm not a narcissist. And I'm not here simply to display how brilliant and original I am. How can I be that way in the first place? It's the same for you. It's the same way that you can be that way. That you can find the genius in yourself to be original in whatever you do. Whatever. Perhaps not in the field of intellectual matters where I navigate, but in whatever you do, in whatever choice of art or expression, whatever form of self-expression, you also can achieve that goal of originality. I'm the only Gnostic scholar, to my knowledge, who has translated the word monogenes as singularity. Generally, they rely on Judeo-Christian presumptions, and they translate it as only begotten. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish, but shall have eternal life. End quote. Well, that is foundation stone of Christian faith, isn't it? And it contains the word monogenes, which is not to be read as only begotten. It is the singularity of the anthropos, the singularity of your species. And when you draw upon the endowment of your species, which comes from the divine parents, Sophia and Thelete, you tap into the root of originality in yourself. So it's my goal not only to display my originality, but to impart that gift to others as well. That's my legacy. At the beginning of this talk, I read a quotation, and I'll read it again. Would I had phrases that are not known, utterances that are strange, in new language that hath not been used, free from repetition, not an utterance which hath grown stale, which men of old have spoken. That's a quotation from an Egyptian writer of the 12th dynasty, my friends, and that is 4,000 years ago. I love that quotation. I found it in this beautiful book, which is called Never to Die, The Egyptians in Their Own Words. And it was written by Josephine Meyer and Tom Prideaux. And I've always lived with that quotation as a statement, kind of a mission statement of my own. If I end up having any kind of reputation at all, I would be most satisfied were it based upon that quotation. Enough said, and I'll be seeing you in the beauty to come.